Welcome to World History Z, the channel where the past comes alive. From ancient empires to modern revolutions, we explore the stories that shaped our world. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and join us on this journey through history. The Road to War: How the World Ignored the Warnings. In 1919, the victors of the Great War gathered in the ornate halls of the Palace of Versailles, determined to write a peace that would end all wars. What they created instead was a blueprint for future disaster. The Treaty of Versailles crushed Germany under an avalanche of guilt and punishment. Stripped of its colonies, its military reduced to a token force and burdened with 132 billion gold marks in reparations. Germany was not only defeated, but disgraced. The once proud empire was forced to admit full responsibility for the war, a clause that burned in the German psyche. Starvation, hyperinflation, and political street fights between communists and fascists became everyday life. By the early 1920s, a loaf of bread cost millions of marks, and people carried money in wheelbarrows. The treaty may have ended the fighting, but it began a new war, one of bitterness, fear, and vengeance. From this scorched landscape emerged something darker: fascism, a political ideology born from desperation and national trauma. In Italy, Benito Mussolini, the former socialist turned ultranationalist, marched on Rome in 1922 and seized power. He created the world's first fascist state, declaring, "Men are tired of liberty." In Japan, economic crises and nationalist fervor gave rise to military control. The Japanese invasion of Manchuria in 1931 marked a terrifying new direction: aggressive imperial expansion. But the most catastrophic force was rising in Germany, where Adolf Hitler, a failed artist and decorated World War I corporal, found his voice in hatred. In fiery speeches filled with mythic visions of German rebirth and racial purity, Hitler blamed Jews, communists, and the Versailles Treaty for Germany's suffering. In 1933, he legally seized power, then dismantled the republic from within. The swastika replaced democracy. The camps began to fill. The world barely blinked. Then came German rearmament, illegally and in secret at first, then boldly and in the open. Hitler rebuilt the Luftwaffe, doubled the size of the army, and reintroduced conscription, defying Versailles with every move. In 1936, the Wehrmacht marched into the Rhineland, a demilitarized buffer zone meant to protect France. It was a bluff. If the French had pushed back, Hitler would have retreated. But they didn't, and the gamble paid off. 2 years later, Austria fell without a single shot. The Anschluss, or Union of Germany and Austria, violated international law, but again no action was taken. The world watched Hitler's army parade through Vienna as cheering Austrians welcomed him. Then, in September 1938, the focus shifted to Czechoslovakia's Sudetenland, home to 3 million ethnic Germans. Britain and France, desperate to avoid war, met with Hitler in Munich and handed it over. British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain returned waving a piece of paper and proclaiming, "Peace for our time." But behind Hitler's handshake was a knife, and Czechoslovakia would be carved apart within months. The final act came on September 1st, 1939. At dawn, under cover of lies and propaganda, 1.5 million German troops stormed across the Polish border. Hitler staged a false flag attack, dressing German soldiers in Polish uniforms to make it look like Poland had struck first. The attack was swift and merciless. Planes bombed towns, tanks crushed resistance, and civilians were executed in the streets. It was the terrifying debut of Blitzkrieg, or lightning war, a strategy of rapid, overwhelming assault. Meanwhile, in the east, the Soviet Union invaded Poland from the other side, fulfilling the secret clause of the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, a chilling agreement between Stalin and Hitler to divide Eastern Europe. 2 days later, Britain and France, at last recognizing that appeasement had failed, declared war on Germany. Yet even then, no troops were sent. The phony war had begun, and Hitler had time to prepare his next move. World War II had begun not with one sudden explosion, but with a series of ignored warning shots. The signs had been there for years, etched into treaties, shouted from podiums, played out in the violent rise of dictators. But the democracies of Europe, weary from the past and blind to the future, chose silence over resistance. And in that silence, tyranny thrived. The cost of inaction would soon be measured in cities reduced to rubble, nations wiped from maps, and tens of millions of lives lost. Blitzkrieg and the collapse of Europe. War had returned to Europe, but it was unlike anything the world had seen before. Gone were the grinding trenches of the First World War. In their place, a terrifying new method of warfare was unleashed. Blitzkrieg, lightning war. It wasn't just a military tactic, it was psychological devastation, an attack on the enemy's body, mind, and will to fight. Blitzkrieg relied on speed, surprise, and brutality. Instead of slow advances, German panzer divisions smashed through enemy lines in spearhead formations, flanked by screaming Stuka dive bombers that struck terror into soldiers and civilians alike. Motorized infantry followed quickly behind, exploiting confusion and cutting off any chance of retreat. Communication lines were severed. Command structures collapsed. The enemy didn't retreat, they disintegrated. It was war as shock and awe, and in Poland it worked with horrifying precision. By the spring of 1940, Hitler turned this terrifying strategy westward. While Britain and France had declared war, they had done little else. Behind the thin shield of the Maginot Line, the French believed they were safe. But Hitler had no intention of fighting a repeat of World War I. Instead, German forces cut through Belgium, smashed through the dense Ardennes forest, and outflanked the Maginot Line completely. It was a military masterstroke and a strategic disaster for the Allies. The fall of France was not just a defeat, it was a collapse. In just 6 weeks, the mighty French military was shattered, and Paris fell without a fight. The world was stunned. France, a symbol of Western power, had been humiliated. Hitler stood triumphantly at the Eiffel Tower, the master of continental Europe. But he had one more enemy across the Channel, the last holdout, Britain. In the summer of 1940, Hitler launched Operation Sea Lion, his planned invasion of the British Isles. But first, he needed to destroy the Royal Air Force. What followed was the Battle of Britain, the first major air campaign in history and the first time Hitler's war machine met fierce organized resistance. German bombers and fighters launched wave after wave across the English Channel, targeting airfields, radar stations, and cities. The Blitz, as it came to be known, turned London into a sea of fire night after night. But the British, outnumbered and under constant pressure, held on. Pilots of the RAF, some barely out of school, fought until their fuel ran dry. The invention of radar, along with the courage of the few, as Churchill famously called them, allowed Britain to resist. Hitler had expected Britain to fall. Instead, he was forced to turn away, humiliated for the first time. It was a turning point. The Nazi war machine had met its first stalemate. But Hitler's ambition was unrelenting. Convinced of his own invincibility, he turned east to face his greatest ideological enemy, the Soviet Union. On June 22, 1941, without a declaration of war, Operation Barbarossa began, the largest military invasion in human history. Over 3 million German troops, supported by tanks, artillery, and aircraft, surged across a 1,000-mile front. The Red Army was caught off guard, reeling from Stalin's purges and outdated tactics. Entire Soviet divisions were encircled and destroyed. Kiev, Smolensk, and Minsk fell in rapid succession. In the first 6 months, the Wehrmacht advanced hundreds of miles and inflicted millions of casualties. But behind the Nazi front lines, something darker was unfolding. Einsatzgruppen death squads followed the armies, executing Jews, communists, and civilians by the tens of thousands. Barbarossa wasn't just a military campaign, it was a genocidal crusade. And yet, in their arrogance, the Nazis underestimated the Soviet Union's resolve, its brutal climate, and the sheer scale of the Eastern Front. As German tanks approached Moscow, the skies turned grey and the snow began to fall. Supply lines stretched thin, engines froze, soldiers starved. The Blitzkrieg had finally lost its lightning. Operation Barbarossa marked a critical shift in the war. What was supposed to be a swift victory turned into a bloody war of attrition. Hitler had opened a second front and unknowingly signed the beginning of his own downfall. Thanks for watching World History Z, where the past meets the present. If you enjoyed this journey through history, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you never miss a new story. Until next time, keep exploring the world of history.